I just want to say a couple of quick words before we turn things right over to Isabelle. First, I want to thank our sponsors for our Naturalist Journey series for making this possible. I want to thank Hunger Mountain Co-op, Onion River Outdoors, Union Mutual, Washington Electric Co-op, and the Edward Jones Office of Keith LaCroix. So thanks again to our sponsors. And also thanks again to all of you, our community, our members, all of our fans of the Nature Center, whether this is your first time joining us or whether you live down the street and hang out with us every day. It's a pleasure to have you in this virtual space. If you are having a great time this evening, I encourage you to head over to our website and support us with a donation or a membership. I'm also going to put in the chat as we go a link over to Isabelle's site and her book and some of the things that she's working on too, so you can be plugged into what's going on in her realm as well. A quick housekeeping thing. We're going to have this presentation recorded, and it'll be up on our website, northbranchnaturecenter.org/presentations. It'll be up there in about 24 hours from now, and we'll keep it up for a period of time. So if anything goes weird with your technology or you have to go, you can always tune in and watch it again or watch what you missed on our website. Feel free to add in the Q&A or the chat any questions you have. I'm going to collect those, and we'll have a Q&A at the end of the talk tonight. So please do make use of the Q&A in the chat, and that'll come right to me. And without further ado, Isabelle, it's my pleasure to welcome you to Vermont, sort of. And I'm really looking forward to our evening together. So thank you so much for sharing your work with us.
Hello, Sean. Thank you very much for inviting me tonight. I'm thrilled to be here, and I really want to thank the Nature Center for hosting this this event as part of the Naturalist Journeys. And thank you everyone for joining us. I'm happy to share a few stories from the field tonight and what it's like to be a conservation photographer. And so before we get into sharing some of these stories from the field, I want to tell you a little bit about me and how I got started. So as you may be able to tell from the accent, I grew up in France. This is the hometown, my hometown where I grew up. It's called Montauban. It's southwest of France. And as you can see from this photo aerial view, it's quite far from the ocean. And one day, when I was about 9 years old, I was watching television with my parents, and I saw those news of a massive oil spill that had devastated the coast of Brittany in France. And I saw those images of the coast, and I saw these seabirds covered in oil. And this really made a profound impact on me. And remember, I grew up in a town far from the sea and never been to Brittany and never seen a seabird in my life. And yet I was really profoundly devastated by what I saw. So at that time, the people in Brittany were desperately asking for help. They were wanting volunteers to come and help clean up the coasts and help the birds. So I immediately asked my parents if I could go and help and do my part. And of course, my parents said, no, you have to stay in school. So I didn't go, but for me, it was a pivotal moment. This is that time where I realized the power of images to move you and to inspire you into action. So my decision was made at this very young age. I decided I would become a journalist and a photographer, documenting environmental issues and wildlife. So I kept that promise. I graduated from high school. I went to Paris to do my undergrad degree in political science. This is a shot of Notre Dame. And then from there, I went to Columbia University and did a program that went to journalism school, where I specialize in photojournalism. And when I was at Columbia in New York, I spent a lot of time documenting inner city neighborhoods, spend a lot of time in the South Bronx. And that really was, for me, a bit of an eye-opener, so much so that I decided after that I wanted to study urban planning as well. So I did another degree at MIT in urban planning. However, my passion and commitment to wildlife never faded. And after my degree in planning, I moved to Vancouver, British Columbia, where I am today. And Vancouver is, in BC in general, is a fantastic place to observe wildlife. It's the province with the highest biodiversity in Canada. So I got started with being a conservation photographer. So I jumped into this field. And how do you jump in? How do you do this? So I absorbed the environment locally that was around me. So I spent a lot of time with my camera documenting species. This is a shot of me in a mud flat area, which is an important stopover for migrating birds in BC. I also traveled different places. I'm here in Namibia photographing elephants. But I quickly realized that if I wanted to tell stories of wildlife at risk and environmental science, I needed to have some collaborations. And the photojournalist's best friend, in that case, when you're starting as a career as a conservation photographer, is the scientist. So I spent a lot of time with scientists in the field because they have this very deep perspective, understanding of what they do and the habitats they're studying. So they really offered me a unique opportunity to uncover some of these wildlife stories that I was really wanting to tell. In turn, scientists were interested in collaborating because as a scientist, what you do, you collect data in the field, and you spend time understanding the species you're involved in, but you don't necessarily have the time to get your science out to the public. So it's an interesting partnership, if you can make that work. So that's what I did. So I started out locally, and one of my first projects was to work with this young wildlife biologist who is here holding with a lot of care a rattlesnake. So this wildlife biologist was studying rattlesnakes in the Okanagan region of British Columbia, which is one of the fastest growing regions of BC. And she was interested in learning more about the impact of urban development on the health, reproduction, and lives of these rattlesnakes. Maybe it was the urban planner in me that made me choose this project, but I was really interested in that interfacing between wildlife and people, and how these developments were impacting the migration routes of these rattlesnakes. And I'm sharing this photo here because what I want you to notice here, so this young woman, Emily, is holding this snake and she's very cautious. You see the head of the rattlesnake is in this tube, just because, as you probably know, rattlesnakes can be extremely dangerous and you don't want to get near them because you may not make it out alive. But what I want to show you here is, notice is her smile and her look of love for this species. And I think for me, it was a theme throughout my work in the field, is to really show this connection and the love of these scientists, conservationists, people that work with those species, and inspire people to love these animals as well, because you don't tend to think of rattlesnakes as the most charismatic or species that you really want to love and appreciate. But I love that tenderness and gentleness in her face there. So I worked on different other projects. This one in particular was about documenting northern spotted owls in the Pacific Northwest. It's an endangered species in Canada. It's one of the most endangered birds. Actually, in fact, there's hardly any left in British Columbia. So to find these owls, I had to travel to Oregon and Washington. And I met this man who had dedicated his life to studying the northern spotted owl. He had spent 40 years of his life doing this. And I was grateful and lucky that he shared his knowledge of the owls. And here again, what I want to show you here is this man is having this fantastic smile and tenderness for this juvenile spotted owl that looks quite surprised, and he's banding them to monitor the population over time. And so spending time with these scientists that have so much knowledge and experience, know the field so well in this species, really allowed me to gain that deeper perspective to tell the stories of the plight, in that case of the spotted owl, and to start sharing images of what these animals look like, and most importantly, their habitat, where they live. And then I wanted to be a bit more adventurous, and was very interested in a species that has fascinated, has always been a point of fascination for me, the narwhal. So the narwhal, you see here pictured in this photo with their tusk, are living in the Arctic. And I had a few years ago the opportunity to join a field expedition, a team of scientists that were studying the narwhal in the Canadian Arctic, where 90% of the world narwhal's population spend their summers. So this is one of the first shot I got of this, but I went and traveled to Baffin Island, and this is our camp, I guess. And there's nothing there. So in the summer in Canadian Arctic, it's all wind and cold. You don't get there to get a suntan for sure. And we were there to capture narwhals. And when you do an expedition like this, as a photojournalist alongside of a team of scientists, you're an integral part of the team. That means you're not just there to take photographs, but you're also there to take part in the entire life of the camp. In that case, that meant being on polar bear watch. And when you're on polar bear watch, well, that means there are polar bears close to the camp, and they're all dying to get into that kitchen tent that we have. So we were on teams of 2 on polar bear watch, 3 hours, just constantly looking for signs of polar bears and alerting the camp if there was a polar bear coming near us. It sounds like an exciting and fun experience to be on polar bear watch, but to be honest, you don't feel that way when it's midnight and you have to keep awake to do this duty. Anyway, I was really fortunate that during that 2 weeks period, we captured 5 narwhals. So this is what it looks like. I was in the water, cold water, with the scientists trying to stay out of their way, capture the action. So what they're doing on this photo, they're placing satellite tags on these animals. And before they release them, they do that quickly to minimize the impact on the animals. And what they are really trying to do is learn more about this population. It's very difficult to study narwhals. They spend 9 months of the year in complete darkness in the packed ice. So for scientists to learn more about this species, there's really, they have to work very hard to do this. So there I photograph all the action, and it's not smooth sailing when you're looking to capture a narwhal. So there, and for me, it's trying to stay out of the way, getting those action shots of their work. And you see here one of the vets holding the tail, because that tail, if you get a tail near you, that's not a positive experience. Just be while acting very quickly for the welfare of the animal to try and get those tags on and do body measurements and other things. And again, I'm sharing this photo because you can see a close-up of the tusk here and the animal, but you see this connection and intensity and focus of this man who works with the Vancouver Aquarium, who is making sure the narwhal is okay and they can proceed with this procedure. This is a photo of me after the capture. As I said, I was in the water with them with my suit all the time. So I look quite happy, thinking, oh, great, this is all over. It turned out that it was not all over because, as I said, it's teamwork and you're on all the time. So right after this narwhal capture, I was moved back to the kitchen tent where I'm doing the dishes here with, and I haven't had the time to take the suit off. And you can see here I'm under the high surveillance of another researcher in the back, and she doesn't look too convinced. I don't think she thought my skills at doing the dishes were that great. So trying to improve since, but there we are. So going to these field expeditions in the cold, in the hot, in the remote environments really require a degree of flexibility, adaptability, being in the moment, and building trust. You're part of the team with his researchers when you go out there as a photojournalist. And here, well, I'll reassure you, these are not a team of terrorists. They're scientists at on the shore of Hudson Bay in Churchill in the summer. And I joined this expedition to document how they would, again, capture beluga whale, also to attach tags, transmitter tag, to study this population of beluga whales. And we're here on the shore. And here the conditions, not so much the cold, but it's the mosquitoes. So they have the full gear of mosquito nets and suits because, well, to get to the wells, you have to survive the wall of mosquitoes. And if you want to make it out alive, this is what you have to do. So here we are after we brave the mosquitoes. We are in the field, and I'm here on a Zodiac standing very precariously. Thank God you can't really see me, but I'm really trying to position myself to get this wide angle shot of these teamwork, these researchers hard at work who just captured these beluga and doing this work of making measurements and attaching those tags. And it's a lot of action, it's a lot of water. So I consider myself lucky enough that I didn't fall in the water as you're in the middle of the action, but I did lose a lens on that trip. So these are the risks of these expeditions, be in the moment and accept that there is some level of risk. But I was really quite grateful I was able to join this expedition. And that gave way to a number of stories and articles and photo essays. One of them I want to highlight, which is about a man, Jack Orr, which I call the well hunter, but he's really a scientist with fisheries and oceans, Canada. And he was a man who had a deep love for these beluga whales and narwhals, and spent all his life capturing these whales to tag them and follow them and build understanding of them in the field. So from there, I spent my time back and forth in those hot and cold environment. And as I said, you have to be quite flexible in the work we do when you accompany these teams of researchers. You're a member of the team. You're building their trust relationship with the people in the field that spend time there. And here I'm on a project back in the Okanagan, British Columbia, documenting the story of the burrowing owl. The burrowing owl, it looks big on this photo, but actually it's very small. It's the size of a pop can, so it's tiny. And sadly, the story there is that these owls were completely gone from British Columbia. Their habitat were, grassland habitat were destroyed. And a team of volunteers, concerned citizens, conservationists, scientists, ranchers said, well, that's not right. We want to bring burrowing owls back into this landscape of British Columbia. So they embarked on a big project of reintroducing the owls. And so they spent many years restoring the habitat, constructing artificial burrows for the owls to breed. They did a captive breeding program. So I documented this whole process. And this is the landscape, what it looks like. And if you see in the picture, I give you a moment, there's a little owl on the corner there. So I was invited to document this process. This is someone here in the field who is actually placing an owl in a burrow for them to do their work. And here's the result: a baby burrowing owls. That's what we want, building the next generation. This is a close-up of this burrowing owls. They're really insanely cute. And so here I was photographing their process and how they're monitoring these owls. And of course, they said to me, well, would you like to participate and to just put down your camera for a second and put back one of these owls in the field? And I said, yes, of course, I like to do that. Even though you can see I'm a little bit tense in there, I feel I have a great responsibility here to handle this owl, small owl, very delicately. So I did this, but I can tell you one thing is that this owl was not too impressed by my ability to release it. Whoever was taking the pictures, what the hell is she doing there? So I survived that, but I must say, being able as a photojournalist to be immersed in the field alongside those people and having a chance to have a hands-on literally experience, give you that intimate sense of connection to the landscape, to the environment, to the species. And it really allowed me to build deeper, richer stories about these efforts to here in this case to reintroduce this species into the landscape. So you may ask me, how do you, and people often ask me, how do you choose project? How do you choose what you're going to work on? And when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I made that promise to myself that I would become a photojournalist documenting species in the field, I didn't quite know then what was coming and the wildlife extinction crisis and how many more wildlife species would become endangered. So anyway, so I have to choose, and sometimes I mean you're in it for the long term. So I wanted to work on the North Atlantic right whale. The North Atlantic right whale is an endangered whale that lives in Canada and in the US. And it was called the right whale by hunters that were hunting them because sadly they thought it was the right whale to hunt because it was slowly moving, so easy to hunt. So very endangered whale, and wanted to photograph them and show their stories. So I went to Lubec, which is a small town in Maine. And I made a plan with those researchers, and they told me, well, come and to Lubec. We have 200 whales that come during the summertime. So I said, yeah, that sounds great. If I'm promised 200 whales, I'll come and do this project. So I went to Lubec, and then I showed up, but well, that particular year, the whales did not show up. So I waited and waited and waited. There were lots of fog. We couldn't get out in the boat, and the whales didn't come. So even the cruises changed to humpback whales rather than the right whales. So for all this time, I sat there and waiting for the whales that never came, and all I had the opportunity to photograph was the tail of this painting of the whale tail there, which is at the local whale station. So by the end of the trip, having not seen a single whale, felt very frustrated. And this is how I felt. This is not me, but it's a photo of a woman dressed up as a pirate, because the only piece of excitement at Lubec in this time of the year in the summer was when I was there, was a pirate festival that happened then. So you can see that life in the field it can be very frustrating, and you have to be prepared for disappointments and that things don't turn up or don't go as you planned them. And so you have to be humble, patient, and go for plan A, plan B, plan C. And so in the cases of the right whales, it actually took me several years before I was able to actually see the whales in the field. I had to try several locations, and there it is. Finally, I got to see them and photograph them. You can see here in the boat. That's me crouched down with the whales while they're tagging. They're actually following them to collect some blow samples to get measures of their health. So that's a close-up of those strangely looking creatures. I was really very happy to finally photograph them. And I'm just going to stop for a second on this shot of the head of this right whale. And we call this whale Rudolph. Rudolph because of its patch that it has there on the head. And the white patch is all about, it's actually a sad story. It's actually a scar from an entanglement. And one of the major threats these right whales face today is entanglement in fishing gear. Over 86% of the population has had at least one entanglement in their life. So that makes them at a higher risk. So when it comes to photographing species and choosing what to photograph and projects to work on the long term, I wanted I came across that story, which is more of a story of a hope, and which is right in my backyard. I felt after working on the right whale, which is a story of a species decline, having a struggle to come back and survive, I needed maybe a boost to my mental health. So I came across that story, the story of the sea otter. So I live in British Columbia, and sea otters were hunted to near extinction during the fur trade. In BC, British Columbia, the last otter was shot in the late 20s. And so that was it. There were no more otters in British Columbia. And then a team of scientists and conservationists thought, well, we should have sea otters on this landscape. They've always belonged here. So let's reintroduce them. So in the late 60s and early 70s, they reintroduced 89 otters to the west coast of Vancouver Island in BC. And the otters, well, they liked what they saw, they expanded. And today there's 7,000 otters in British Columbia, and their population is still growing. So it's an incredible story of hope and resilience of here is a species coming back from the brink of extinction on the landscape. So I wanted to write that story of hope and resilience. And did I mention they're insanely cute and beautiful? So I did that. And then I realized there's more to the sea otter story. It's not just a beautiful, cute face. It has more. And what I've learned is that sea otters are also a keystone species. When they return to landscape through their appetite, they have a really big influence on their environment. They contribute to the revival of kelp forests in a very profound way. So I thought to myself, oh, that's really interesting. I really want to document this story. So it challenged my thinking as a photojournalist about how can I tell this story in a more ecosystem approach, habitat approach, which is not just about telling the story of that species and different behaviors, but how it impacts people and the ecosystem. So I embarked on this decade-long project on documenting sea otters in their habitat, learning about the science and documenting everything I could about not only the sea otters, but the ecosystem and the change of the ecosystem. So you can see here a bit of a mix of the photographs of me in the years that I've done that, photographing sea otters from a kayak, photographing from a boat. And you can see here, I have my sea otter mask. I was perhaps hoping to attract sea otters to come closer. That didn't work. I documented a rescue of a baby sea otter pup. And you can see there on the left, the otter is really interested in photography, trying to check out my equipment. On the top, I documented a sea otter surgery. And then, of course, every time I travel throughout a sea otter range, I tried as much as possible to go to otter-themed hotels. In that time frame, over that period of 10 years, I've joined a different number of expeditions. This is a diver, that's not me. It's a diver who is in Monterey Bay. And what he's doing here is working on capturing sea otters here to get a better understanding of how they're using their habitat and how they're influencing the environment around them. So here they're actually fitting those tags within the otters to learn more and follow them in the field. I included these photos because this is a sea otter pup here about being released back in the wild. And I don't know what they're talking about, but they seem to be having a serious talk between this wildlife biologist, this vet, and the otter. So you get to capture this lighter moment in this hardcore science work. And then so I was throughout the years, I was able to document a story that is changing, evolving, because scientists, as it turns out, are constantly learning about sea otters and how they influence their environment in so many ways. So learn is not just about the kelp forest, but sea otters are also influencing different habitats, salt marshes, seagrasses. Here they photographed in an estuary. So that led me to write stories for other magazines. Here a couple of these stories I wrote. And eventually I compiled all this field work, all this photograph, all these stories of working with scientists and what I've learned about sea otters into a book called Sea Otters, A Survival Story. And that book includes one of my most recent discoveries about otters, which is that Dame Judi Dench is absolutely, like myself, passionate about otters. That's her favorite animal. So she was very gracious to write the foreword for that book. So I guess being a conservation photographer working in the field is really about being flexible, adaptable, and being in the moment and being curious. So I want to share an anecdote of being in the field. I was on the West Coast, on British Columbia, and I was here on an island photographing these birds, tiny little birds, and really being captivated by the incredible light in this early morning hours. So here I am with my really long lens photographing this bird from a distance. And then I look up from the birds to the landscape and I see this, a wolf, a coastal wolf. What a surprise. I've always been interested in coastal wolves. And so I thought, oh, wow, what an incredible opportunity. So here I am in this habitat, and someone else was awake in these early mornings and saw me and took that photo of me and this wolf. And so you see me with the tripod there, walking slowly and looking at this wolf. And what I want you to take notice of, if you can, is the rock to the left of the screen there. So there's a rock. And so what I had done there in that moment, I said, okay, I want to try and be nimble and follow that wolf from a distance with my long lens, never approach wildlife, trying to minimize my impact as much as I can. So what I did, I had a backpack and I left it on that rock there to advance in the environment. So I did this. So I took my eyes away from the wolf. And then I'm back looking around and said, oh, this wolf is gone. What happened? Where is the wolf? I missed it. I couldn't believe it because it really was an open landscape. And I thought, okay, well, too bad. I guess I'll turn back and I'll grab my backpack and I'll head for breakfast. And then what do I see when I turn my head back is that wolf. In that second, that wolf had somehow turned around and come behind that rock, checking out, so noticing that there was a foreign object in its environment, this backpack, wanting to see what it was all about. So I stopped and I still have my long lens and I was able to capture a few shots of this situation, which was really funny and amusing because here is this wolf, which in this moment reminded me of a dog, really, which, I mean, we know that dogs come from wolves. Wolves are their ancestors. We're just really very curious about what's happening and what's this bag all about, and slowly moving towards the bag. And here's a wider shot of the wolf checking out the bag. So the wolf quickly moved on because there was nothing interesting in this bag. By the way, I never take food or anything when I'm out in the fields. I know I don't want to attract wildlife in any way. It's very important for ethics and being in the wild. But in that moment, it was certainly a lesson for me. It was a lesson of not only being surprised by wildlife, but understanding that the wildlife, they see you, they know you're in their environment, you're a guest in their territory, they're watching you. And so it's a lesson in being mindful of where you are in the environment and your footprint, and you want to try and minimize. So here the backpack was a foreign thing, and the wolf was really keeping notice of everything I did in the same environment. So it's something to be mindful of always when you're in a wildlife habitat. and talking about being surprised and being in the moment and seeing things you didn't expect. One of the stories I want to share is the story of a frog. So I always, when I'm in the field with scientists, following species of photographing, I try to be open and keep a curious mind, I guess. And I call that maybe the Russian dolls approach, where, you know, you have the Russian dolls and you open and there's another one that comes in and another one. So how can I see the story behind the story? So that day I was photographing the endangered Oregon spotted frog in a wetland near Vancouver. I was photographing and filming, actually. So it was for a short documentary film I was making about this endangered frog. There's just a few of these left, and they're very shy, elusive frogs, very difficult to find in the field. And I was with this team of researchers that wanted to learn more and find those frogs so they could better conserve these frogs in the environment. And that day, well, something surprised me. There was a dog. I was like, wow, a dog. Well, for me, my immediate reaction was, well, dogs and wildlife don't mix. And what I learned is that this dog named Ali, it's an Australian cattle dog, is a conservation canine, and that Ali had been specially hired to help those scientists find the shy, elusive frog. This terrain, this wetland, is very difficult to navigate for people. You have mud up to your knees. It's very hard to find the frogs. The breeding season for the frogs is extremely short. So there's not a lot of opportunity to find the frogs and study them. So the dogs, on the other hand, are very fast. They have a powerful sense of smell. And it turns out that this dog, Ali, was able to find the frog in very quickly. So I was completely amazed by this. And for me, it was a bit one of those moments where I thought, oh, I want to learn more about these dogs. So that launched for me into an entirely new project where I learned and documented the incredible work that these conservation canines do around the world to protect, help scientists collect data about endangered species and help them protect them in turn. So here I'm photographing one of these projects. I'm with a dog handler named Heath Smith with his dog Pips, and they're in Haida looking for the elusive Haida airmen. They're looking for tiny scat. So I'm photographing this on the ground. And this is Casey, who is, I guess, symbolizes some of the work these canines conservations do. So I did a lot of work, and I really found the links between the connection between the conservation canines and how they help conserve species quite fascinating. This is an endangered killer whale. It's a southern resident killer whale population in the Salish Sea. And this dog is here his name is Dio, and he's part of a project in Washington State to help scientists locate and retrieve whale scat, floating whale scat. Imagine that, how it's a dog is being able to do that on the water. So this work was really an incredible adventure, and learning about this dog. So that translated into a number of stories on the work the dogs do, science best friends. And it turned into another book, Conservation Canines, How Dogs Work for the Environment, that was actually just published in the fall. So people often ask, you're documenting all these stories of species decline and extinction. How do you keep hope in the face of extinction? And that's a really good question, because this is a reality, and how do we cope with that? Us, not everyone, single of us. And so what I do is I really focus on stories of hope, and I want to share a couple of examples of how I document that. And as a conservation photographer, try to learn lessons that are applicable to all of us and inspire lessons and conservation action. So I live in British Columbia, and we have mountain caribou. And sadly, in the last few decades, caribou are in deep trouble. So I was in the Peace region of British Columbia here on the documenting mountain caribou. And over the years, these caribous have dwindled to almost nothing. And the reason for that, the main reason for that, is their destruction of their habitat through resource extraction and logging and mining. So this is what it looks like in one of the prime caribou habitat. And this photo here to me is very powerful in the sense that it shows what's left of what used to be a herd of thousands of animals. This is a herd of just a handful now of animals. And they seem to be really just have gathered to look at, oh my God, what has happened to our habitat, and looking at the destruction. However, in this story, what was extraordinary is that there was a group of First Nations leaders. They came together, and the caribou is very important to First Nations. And these indigenous people came together and said they were very connected to a specific herd, and they had watched firsthand the decline of these animals they were so deeply connected to. There were only 16 animals left in this herd. So they were really on the edge of extinction. And so they said, and this is a direct quote from the chief there that I interviewed, and he said, caribou were here for us when we needed help. We have to be there for them now. It's a profound quote. And what they said, no, we're not accepting this. We're not accepting extinction. So we're going to do everything we can to help those caribou. So what has happened, a bit of a context, is that those caribou, because there had been so much modifications to their original habitat, disturbance through resource extraction, so people had built roads and linear features. And what has happened is that with those roads in those habitats, that made it really easy for a predator, wolves actually, to travel through those landscapes and to access the caribou. Caribou and wolves had coexisted together for a long time, but they were in separate spaces. But now, because of human disturbance, wolves were able to travel to caribou, and they really made a serious impact on the caribou populations because they were able to get to them and kill them. So what this group of First Nations members did, they got together and they mounted an extraordinary project of emergency saving of these caribou. So each March since 2013, they go by helicopter and they capture the female pregnant caribou. They try to capture as many as they can. Well, remember, there's only 16 in that population, so there were not many to capture in the first place. And what they do, they transport them into a secured pen, which is guarded night and day by First Nations guardians. And when these pens, these female caribous can have their calves and raise them. And they wait until the summer where the calves get strong enough, and eventually they return them to the wild. And that gives them a better chance at surviving in the wild and withstanding predation from wolves. So I got to document this whole expedition and this whole effort to rescue the caribou in March from a helicopter. And what really is for me incredibly powerful in this story, and I'm sharing this photo because here we are, people were almost accepting that these caribou were going to be lost forever. But these people, these First Nations members said no, literally, they wanting to hold on to their last caribou and do whatever they could as a group, as a community, to save their caribou. This is a photo of an elder there, and I love her smile. She's actually talking to this female caribou through the experience and calming it down and comforting and saying that she's going to be okay. And these caribou are doing okay. It's an extraordinary success because since 2013, from 16 caribou, they now have over 100 animals. And they've also secured with the government of British Columbia an agreement to protect more habitat. So it's about saving the animals, but also restoring and protecting habitat, which is extremely important. So stories for me, like this, for me, of people really not giving up and doing everything they can is a story of hope and a story that can really inspire us into action. And this is something that's really dear to me. I want to really document and share those stories so we can translate that to our own lives, and how can we also help. And which leads me to a very close project to mine, which is toads. So you may think, well, toads, after whales and narwhal and sea otters, what is it about Western toads, and how would you spend your time photographing those? They certainly is not on first sight as charismatic as sea otters, but yet they have a lesson to give us. What's that lesson? So this is in British Columbia again. So Western toads live in two habitats. They start their lives in wetlands, and once they breed, they need to pursue their life cycle in forest habitat. So they live in those two different habitats, wetland and forest. And so when they have to move from the wetland to the forest, they have to cross roads. And so every year, there's 3 times a year, there's this migration from the wetland to the forest. And what happens when the toads cross the roads? Well, there are cars. And when there are cars, the story doesn't end well for the toads and they get killed. So you'd say, well, it's a really sad story. Why would you want to tell that story? Well, I wanted to tell this story because close to where those toads lived, there are people near living those roads, residential neighborhoods. And they came across those toads. They're their backyard species. They're the wildlife they associate with, that they see all the time. And people, not conservationists, not just biologists, everyday people, just decided to do everything they could to save those toads from being killed. So what did they do? Well, they transported toads from one side of the road to the other in buckets, like you see on these photos. They also engaged in citizen science projects. They wanted to learn more about the toads, what was the hot spots for them to cross the road so they could collect data. And they even really got together and got funding and got those toad tunnels built so the toads could cross the road safely and make it to the other side of the road. So to me, it's a story that really brings people together. Toads, believe it or not, brings people together. And I wanted to tell that story. And so that became a film called Toad People. And I didn't know that when I made this film, the impact that it would have, because it was shown in a film festival around the world. It even won the Impact Award at the World Screen Film Festival. And after I shown this film in those festivals, I started receiving emails from people all over the world about, and they shared stories of having toads as well in the UK, in Italy, in Switzerland, in all over the places. They were not necessarily the same species, but they were toads and they were having the same problems. And they said how much the film inspired them, because they discovered they were not alone, that there were other people in other parts of the world doing this work as well, of engaging and mobilizing to save a species they cared about. So to me, this is really the ultimate power of conservation photography, because it allows to, well, you showcasing a really very local story in a road, in a village or town in British Columbia. And then here it is, it's having this global impact, global conservation resonance for global amphibian conservation. So if you're interested, this film, Toad People, a short version of it, is actually available on CBC if you like to learn more about the stories of the people. So this brings me to today. And I've shared stories of being in the field all over the world, but we now have had COVID since. So what it is like to be doing conservation photography in a pandemic. This is a photo of me in quite a precarious situation here in a backyard. This is not my backyard, it's someone else's backyard. And I'm here working on a project looking at photographing the Anna's hummingbird. Anna's hummingbirds are fantastic little birds that have learned to adapt to urban environments and live close to us. They actually nest near people's houses, literally in their backyard. And for an urban planner and for someone who's so interested in studying and learning more about human-wildlife coexistence, what a fantastic species to look at and to learn more about in a pandemic time. So I reached out on social media because I didn't have hummingbirds in my backyard. So I reached out on social media and I asked people, well, do you have nests? Do you have hummingbirds in your backyard? So this is how I connected with this family, Tom and Christine, and they said, yes, we have a hummingbird nest. And so I spent several months during the pandemic visiting day after day their backyard garden there and photographing their nests and the hummingbirds. And it was really a fantastic experience. So I was able to, from beginning to end, to see the birds develop, and they hatched successfully, and I saw the fledging. So it was really a success story. And a couple of weeks later, after this project I thought was done, this homeowner in this backyard phoned me and said, hey, it looks like our hummingbird has returned and is having a second set of babies. It turns out that Anna's hummingbirds can have more than one clutch during the season. So I said, great, I'll give it another go and photograph those babies. So here I am photographing those babies, and the homeowners named them. He grew quite fond of these birds. He was observing them from a distance from his window while having in the morning a cappuccino, and on happy hour he was having a gin and tonic. So he then named the bird Gin and Tonic this time. And so it was all great. And then a week later, he phoned me again and said, look, he was really distressed. And he said, look, I'm really worried. I am watching this from my window, and the mom hummingbird, she hasn't come back to the nests. I said, oh, really? What's happening? Because normally she's coming feeding the birds very often, every 15 minutes. I said, oh, that's not good. What has happened? And as you may know, living near humans for these birds come with great risk. And those risks are predation from cats, collision with windows, collision with cars, this predation from crows sometimes. So there's a lot of risk. So I went over to that backyard. That man lived actually close to where I live. And we observed together from indoors and watch. So I called a few people, scientists, what should we do? I called the local wildlife rescue, and they asked us to keep an eye on the birds, whether the mom would return to feed the bird. And that didn't happen. So in the end, by the time where it was getting dark, and they said, well, now it's too late, you can't drop off the birds to the hatchling, to the wildlife rescue center, but you have to feed them because they might not make it through the night. So we said, oh, okay, then that means we have to do something. We have to step into action. So Tom, this is the homeowner, he followed instructions, and he got a little syringe, and he is here portraying the role of the mom hummingbirds. And you can see on this shot how tense he is of really doing this for the birds. He really considered these birds as part of his family and the hatchlings. So he really wanted to make sure these hatchlings survived. And this is a close-up of what he's doing with his little syringe, feeding the birds. And I can assure you that he's not giving them gin and tonic. This is actually sugar water. So he did that, and I photographed that. And then the next day we were instructed to cut the branch, retrieve delicately the nest, and bring it to the wildlife rescue center. So it looks like it's actually, we transported that in a Christmas box, and they really look like a Christmas ornament. And so they were really successfully rehabilitated by the Wildlife Rescue Center, and now they were released back to the wild. And to me, there was a story of that connection again between someone who grew to learn about the hummingbirds' life in their backyard and do something for them. And in times of where we're connecting to nature close to home, what a wonderful way to connect and learn that we can all do our parts, especially for younger people, to do whatever you can to help nature and the environment, whether it is really planting, helping restore a wetland near home, or engaging in citizen science projects like this young boy is learning how to band birds, or in that case, a young boy helping with a release program for the juvenile Oregon spotted frogs. So this is the end of my talk. I have here, I'm just having a quick recap of my books. Gone is Gone, Wildlife Under Threat, Sea Otters, A Survival Story, and Conservation Canines, How Dogs Work for the Environment. These books are all available through my publisher, Orca Books, or through any online bookseller, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, or your favorite independent bookstore. You can find me on my website, and I'm also on Instagram. So please do follow me if you want to know more and have more field stories. And I really want to thank the Nature Center and for you all to be here. And I guess we'll open for questions.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. This was a pleasure to follow you across the world and across so many different species and stories. So much of wildlife photography is focused on capturing images in kind of totally wild places where the goal of the photographer is to remove humans and all signs of humanity from the equation entirely. And today, humans have such a large impact on our world and our wildlife that even in the most remote wilderness settings, regardless of the species, it's no accident that wildlife is there, even whether it's a common species or a rare species. It's thanks to a lot of work by a lot of biologists and land managers and wildlife managers and community scientists and enthusiasts, and there's so many people to make it possible for animals to go about their lives in our own backyards or in the middle of the Amazon or up in the remote Yukon or wherever. And I love that your photography really reminds us of that. And it's really empowering too, that, yes, wildlife is there because of the decisions that we've made and because we're being really intentional about it. And we can all be part of that success story. So anyway, thank you for kind of portraying what it takes to protect these animals. We have a lot of questions. So I guess there's a bunch of like photography nitty-gritty questions, and maybe we'll kind of combine some of those together. So some folks are wondering if you ever take underwater photos, and also like you're photographing in like places with lots of sand and dust and salt water, and what do you like, how are you thinking about keeping your camera gear safe? Do you photograph things underwater, and how do you do that?
Thank you, Sean. All great questions. Yeah, underwater photography. I absolutely admire underwater photographers. I find their photography absolutely beautiful, and I'm in awe, and I follow a number of photographers and their careers. I have a passion of the ocean. That's how I started, and all marine creatures. I spent a lot of time photographing whales and marine creatures. I never tackled underwater photography for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's quite of a specialized field, and I feel it'll take quite a while for me to get at that level, but you never know. And so you have to specialize and choose your areas. I've really focused on photographing these interactions, as you said, Sean, of human-wildlife coexistence, as well as my main focus, and those human stories as well as they relate to wildlife. However, might not come as a surprise that one of the reasons why I chose, because I have this love of the ocean, but the reason why I chose to spend 10 years of my life working on sea otters is because here is a marine creature who's so mindful of my limitation and has agreed to spend so much time at the surface of the water. So, they dive and get these crabs and old clams and everything, and they bring it back up to the surface to eat it. So it's such a species that's accessible to the non-underwater photographer, because here it offers you that glimpse into their lives at the surface. So that's the first question. The second question was about sand, mud, and all that. Yes, I work in relatively extreme environments and unpredictable environments, especially in fast-moving conditions where you're in salt water. What do? I try to protect my camera as much as I can with a lot of cloth, and I have pouches and everything, and I accept also that, like, to have plan Bs, plan As, plan Bs, plan Cs, which is I accept the risk that sometimes things don't turn as you think they will, and you can't protect your camera as you may want to, because you're in the heat of the action and there's a well swinging in front of you, and what do? You're trying to protect and you're trying to get that shot. So there's always a balancing act between protection and getting the shot. It's always a tension there. So I do keep in my tent an extra body or two to make sure that I have a fallback plan, and then I deal with the disaster and the cry afterwards if I need
to. Thanks. Someone's asking, of all the different species you've followed and photographed, is there one in particular that you're the most concerned about?
Concern. That's a tough one. I'm concerned about all species. I can't really just pick one. I think when you get to understand and know all these species, whether it's the more charismatic ones like polar bears or narwhals, and then you get to learn about the rattlesnake and the smaller species, you see that all species are in trouble, and our impact of human footprint is so large, and the climate change and the cumulative impacts of multiple threats. So it's when I go into learning about a species or photographing one, I really look at all these interrelationships, and I try to think about what can that species tell us about this larger message. And I focus in my photography. It's not so much, certainly I love to take portraits, but I really try to look at context as well. Is that what can I do in my photography that will attract or inspire people to take notice of that species, but not just the species that as its own, as a standalone species that I want to protect, the sea otter or the North Atlantic right whale, or whatever species, or the penguin. But what can I do more ecosystem-wide that will protect and have an impact on, say, ocean conservation as a whole, for example? So that's how I try and approach it.
Yeah, thanks. So Annette is wondering, do you keep a notebook, a sketchbook, or a journal to accompany you out there? Yeah, and are you using different kind of ways to kind of collect what you're experiencing out there? Because you're not only a photographer, you're also a writer. And could you just talk about kind of you're wearing two hats, maybe multiple hats at once? Are you putting together ideas for stories while you're out there on the Zodiac, or are you just focusing on photography? Like, how does that process come together? Where does sketching fit into this? Where does having a journal and a notebook fit into this? How does that play together?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question. It's a great question, because often we often make a choice between I'm going to be a photographer and I'm going to be a writer, or I'm going to be a filmmaker, because these are almost three careers in one, and they require a different skills. They require different attention to different details, and it's hard to do everything. However, in my case, I didn't quite want to choose. I love writing. I've loved words, and I love taking pictures. So I've always in my career wanted to combine writing and photography. So when I approach a story, I always think as a photographer is like, well, how am I going to visually tell that story? If somebody just saw a photo without the words, what would they get out of the photo? And when I'm taking a photo, I'm like bringing my writing mind to it, thinking, how am I going to tell the story? So while I'm developing that story, what are the range or the sequence of photos that I need to take to illustrate the words when I'm doing a story? So it's a cross-pollination where words inform photos and photos inform the words. In terms of the logistics, it requires a lot of preparation, but because you can't be on a Zodiac photographing wells and trying to protect your equipment and asking questions. It's like, what are you doing? And how does that work? Because people are busy, you're busy. There's so much going on there that, you know, the shots, it's going fast. You want to get those shots. So what I do a lot of preparation ahead of the field trip. For me, the work begins at my desk months or weeks before I get into the field. I read a lot. I interview those researchers. I spend time with them before just to prepare. So when I go into the field wanting to photograph that beluga story, well, I have a vague idea of what's going to happen, or at least what I think is going to happen, because of course it's always surprising. So doing this, I have a recorder, so I record interviews. And then, you know, when you spend so much time with researchers in the field, getting from and to places, traveling with them, you're not always in a boat in the middle of the action. So certainly when you're, for example, on polar bear watch in the middle of the night, you're not alone with your partner, whether you're with the scientists, and you get to ask, you have their undivided attention for 3 hours. And remember, they have to keep awake for those 3 hours. So, you know, you have your recorder, I have a notebook, and you get to spend all this time and hearing these stories and getting these incredible connections and all this knowledge that you wouldn't have access otherwise. So I try to also make notes and remembering some of what I see, the colors, texture, the anecdotes as I go.
How do you actually connect with these researchers in the first place? Are they reaching out to you saying, hey, we would like somebody to document this trapping session that we're doing for caribou or whatever? Or is it the other way around, where during your preparations on whatever species it may be, whatever project it is, you're actually looking to figure out who it is that's doing the research, and then kind of approaching them as I guess as a journalist? And I'm just wondering how those relationships get built in the first place.
Yeah, it's a great question. It takes time. It takes time to establish those relationships and the credibility, because I mean, as scientists, they're protective of their work. That often it's their lifetime work, and so if they invite a journalist to come along in an expedition in a remote place, well, it's an extra body to deal with. And so they want to make sure that they're going to invite somebody who's going to be part of the team, who is going to be open and a good listener. And so they have to have trust in what you do. And they also want to have trust in the stories you're going to say. You're certainly completely independent in what you write and how you write it, but they want to have that confidence that their stories are going to be told in a way that will get that message out. So, you know, it's a lifetime work of building those relationships. Sometimes researchers have reached out to me, or, you know, as a journalist, I attend conferences as well. I read a lot. I'm constantly on the lookout and learning about things. And then I work with conservation groups, because my photography, I didn't mention that, but I support conservation organizations with campaigns to advance conservation, raising awareness, education. So these groups have their own contacts with scientists and field work, and so that's how you actually also do it.
Mm-hmm. I guess so. There's another question from someone perhaps maybe interested in following in a similar, learning how to kind of end up in a similar career to where you've gotten yourself to, and just wondering about how, you know, the nuts and bolts of how you pay the bills for this. Are you grant funded in certain cases? There's the publications that you write for, you know, various magazines and publications and books and all that. You talk a little bit about like the how one might actually end up doing this professionally in a similar way that you have.
It is hard work, and I give talks to high school students that are journalism programs or want to get into these careers, and I tell them, you know, it's hard work. You should follow your passion, and you should build that from a place that's accessible to you. So if you want to start as a conservation photographer, photojournalist, or writer in these areas, pick a project close to you, build local relationships. with scientists, with naturalists, with conservation organizations, find out what their needs are and how they could use your skills and as a photographer, and find those stories. And then from there, build a body of work and find those stories and follow your passion, and then get that published and get your name out little by little. I mean, for me, it didn't start overnight, certainly. It's something that I built really over years. But the fact for me that I could combine photography, writing, filmmaking as well, writing books, and also being out there. I love connecting with people, sharing my passion. So education, public education, and working with group. And so some of these organizations in the environmental sector have also funded my work to go out there to tell those stories. So this is how I personally have put it together, and it's so satisfying to also be able to support campaign-driven environmental organizations that want to work with visual storytellers to carry that messages out to the public.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. We got two quick questions. One is, and we'll kind of wrap things up with these two questions. One is for those that are like really the camera, like the camera gearheads, what kind of camera do you have, and what is your kind of standard camera and lens that you're going out into the field with?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm a Nikon person, so let's get it out of the way for Canon fans. I travel with a couple of bodies. I'm conscious of weight always when you travel, and weight on my own body and you see it's a lot of action and traveling long distances. So I limit myself when I can to a couple of bodies. So I have the D850, and I have also used a mirrorless camera as well, which is a lighter body as well, which is great. So I can switch lenses for these unexpected opportunities. My longest lens is a 200 to 500. I have a tripod, certainly, and then I have a wide angle and a mid lens. I have a 200 to 70 to 200, and I carry, teleconverters. I have a fish eye as well, so I got a mix as well, and large pockets, not deep pockets, large pockets in my jackets to carry this all and being able to move flexibly. It's all about bags. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry. The photograph of the toad with the fisheye lens looked so great.
I have a funny story. If I have the time, I'll tell a funny story about this one. So I don't know if I talked about the risk of being with narwhal in the water and with beluga and falling off the boat and everything. One of the most tricky and risky situations was actually being in the water with those toads. I don't know if you've ever been in that experience of being in a lake with breeding toads. And so the males, when they're breeding, they go by, they're trying to grab the females, obviously, that they goal in life. And then they will grab to anything they see, And in your case, sometimes, you're here with your fisheye lens and you see these toads coming, grabbing and anything that you want, like tripod and thing. So it's very tricky to be out in those situations. But anyway, so that's the kind of unexpected size of trying to get a fisheye story there of bringing toads.
That is not what I thought was happening behind the lens during that photo shoot. Wow. All right, last question. What would be your dream photo shoot in terms of location and what species?
Oh, my dream photo shoots. There's so many. It's hard to pick one. Yeah, every species is intriguing to me. I certainly have dreams to spend more time with wolves, I must say, because I had these encounters and I found they're so intriguing, and they're one of these animals that have had such the most difficult relationships with humans throughout centuries. I mean, we still yet have to learn to live with wolves, and they're being misunderstood, and yet they have this incredible influence on the ecosystem, like the sea otters. So I would absolutely love to do for wolves what I did for sea otters, being able to document their lives, but also how they influence the ecosystem, if I have to pick one.
That's a good one. Yeah. Well, Isabelle, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thanks everybody for joining us for this evening, and we hope that you are as inspired and empowered as I am now. The presentation will be up at northbranchnaturecenter.org/presentations for a while. It'll be up probably by tomorrow midday if you'd like to see that. Also put there links to your, I put in the chat earlier, links to your website and some other things, but I'll put that on the presentation page as well, your website, Conservation Canines book, and some other ways to get in touch with you. Again, thanks everybody, and thank you to Isabelle. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you everyone who joined tonight, and for all your incredible questions. I really appreciate it.
All right, good night, everybody.